wind howled through the open plains of Red Hollow, carrying the scent of sagebrush and rain. High above the valley, a lone rider appeared on the ridge, his hat low, his coat dusted in gold light. His name was Rowan Cade, a man folks whispered about in every saloon west of Kansas. Once a poor ranch hand, he'd become one of the richest cattlemen this side of the Mississippi. But that evening, Rowan wasn't riding home in triumph. He was riding home to a letter that broke him. The letter had come from a preacher, Reverend Mallory. It spoke of Rowan's parents, the Cades of Hollow Creek, who had grown old, frail, and nearly blind. They were being cared for by a widow in the valley, a woman named Clara Vance. She'd been feeding them from her own table, nursing them through cold winters when no one else would. The preacher's words were plain. Without her, they would not have survived. Rowan couldn't believe it. His parents had always been proud, too proud to take help, but he'd been gone too long, chasing fortune across the frontier, and pride had turned to hunger. Now guilt rode beside him, heavy as the rifle at his hip. As the thunder rolled, he pressed harder on his horse's reins. He could see the outline of the old family cabin ahead, leaning, tired and gray against the stormy sky. Smoke curled weakly from the chimney. His heart pounded. After 10 years away, he was finally coming home. When Rowan dismounted, the front door creaked open. There, standing in the flickering lamplight, was a woman no one had told him about. Not her face, not her voice, not the quiet strength in her eyes. Clara Vance. Her dress was patched, her hands rough with work, but her presence filled the doorway like sunlight after rain. "Evening," she said softly, her voice trembling just enough to hide the surprise. "You must be Rowan Cade." He nodded, hat in hand. She smiled faintly. "Your parents are inside. They've been waiting for you." And in that moment, soaked in rain and shame, the millionaire cowboy realized something he hadn't felt in years: the sting of love unearned. The door groaned as Rowan stepped inside, the smell of wood smoke and herbs wrapping around him like an old memory. The room was dim, lit by a single oil lamp on the table, and there by the fire sat his parents, frail, thinner than he remembered, their hair silver as moonlight. His mother's hands trembled as she reached for him, tears welling up before words could. "Rowan," she whispered, "is it really you?" He fell to one knee beside her, his voice cracking. "It's me, Ma. I'm home." The old man stirred in his chair. Rowan's father, once broad and iron-willed, now shrunken and tired. He didn't speak, just nodded, and in that silence was both pride and apology. From the corner of his eye, Rowan saw Clara again. She was quietly tending a pot on the stove, moving like someone who lived there for years but still didn't call it home. Her sleeves were rolled up, her hair tucked behind her ears. There was nothing fancy about her, but every motion was full of care. She turned to him, holding a bowl of stew. "They haven't eaten much today," she said softly. "They wait till sundown. Say it reminds them of when you'd ride back from the fields." Her words hit him deep. He hadn't realized how much he'd been gone. "How long you been helping them?" he asked. She hesitated. "A while now, since last winter." "You ain't family," he said, not in anger, but disbelief. Clara lowered her gaze. "Guess I just couldn't watch them fade away." For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Then Rowan noticed the small things: the patched curtains, the clean floors, the garden tools by the door. She'd held this place together when he hadn't even written home. Later that night, as his parents slept, Rowan stepped outside. Rain had stopped, and stars shone faintly through the clouds. Clara stood by the porch rail, arms folded, looking out toward the dark hills. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. She smiled sadly. "No one had to. That's the thing about kindness, Mr. Cade. It ain't about owing, it's about doing what's right." Her words sank into him like a nail in fresh wood. He looked at her, truly looked. And for the first time in years, Rowan Cade, the man who owned half the valley, felt poor. Dawn came slow over Hollow Creek, brushing gold over the wet earth. The storm had passed, but the world still smelled of rain and regret. Rowan stood outside the barn, feeding his horse in silence. His mind was a tangled mess. Gratitude, guilt, and a strange pull toward the widow who had done what he never did. Inside the cabin, Clara was already awake, mending his mother's quilt. Her hands worked quick, practiced, each stitch neat as prayer. Rowan stepped in quietly, watching her. There was something about the way she moved, a mix of sorrow and strength, that made him want to know her story. "You always this early?" he asked. Clara didn't look up. "Sun don't wait on no one, Mr. Cade." He smiled faintly, then sat across from her. "Reverend Mallory wrote me, said you lost your husband 2 winters ago?" Her needle paused mid-air. A shadow crossed her face. "Yes, Jasper Vance. He was a ranch hand here in Hollow Creek. Worked for a man named Cade." The air seemed to freeze. Rowan's chest tightened. "My father." She nodded once, eyes glistening. "Jasper died trying to save one of your cattle hands in a river flood. Your father paid him fair wages. But after Jasper's death, there wasn't much left for me, except his good name and a grave under the cottonwoods." Rowan swallowed hard. He remembered that flood. He'd been in San Antonio, closing a cattle deal worth a fortune while a good man drowned on Cade land. And the widow of that man, the same one who had fed his parents, cleaned their home, saved their dignity, was now sitting before him, quiet and unbitter. "Why'd you still help us?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Clara met his gaze. "Because your father never forgot Jasper. When he got sick, he told me once, if ever my time comes, promise me you'll look after her son." I figured he'd have wanted the same in return. Outside, the sun broke over the valley, painting her face in light. And Rowan knew then the debt between them wasn't written in money or land, but in mercy. That night, as he sat by the fire watching his parents sleep, Rowan made a quiet vow. He'd repay Clara Vance, not with gold, but with something far rarer in a cowboy's world: redemption. The days that followed carried a quiet kind of peace, the kind that only comes after a storm. Morning after morning, the millionaire cowboy could be seen at the old Cade ranch, sleeves rolled up, boots in the mud, helping Clara with chores she once did alone. He mended fences, chopped wood, and repaired the barn roof that had leaked for years. His hands, once meant for ledgers and contracts, were now blistered and calloused again, just like when he was a poor ranch hand. Clara noticed, though she said little. Sometimes she'd glance his way when he wasn't looking, her expression softening for just a moment before she turned back to work. One afternoon, while fetching water from the creek, Rowan caught the reflection of the cabin in the water. Brighter now, alive again. The garden was growing, chickens clucked near the fence, and his parents laughed more than they coughed. It all felt right. And yet, guilt still sat in his chest like a stone. That evening he found Clara on the porch, sewing by lamplight. The night air was cool, filled with the hum of crickets. Rowan stood there, hat in hand. "Clara," he said quietly, "I came back thinking I'd repay you for what you did, but I reckon I can't. Not in gold, not ever." She didn't stop sewing. "I never did it for gold." "I know," he said. "That's what makes it harder." There was a long silence between them, heavy but peaceful. Then Clara looked up. "You can't change the past, Rowan, but you can honor it. Your parents, they ain't just breathing easier 'cause of me. It's 'cause you came home." Her words hit deeper than any sermon. For the first time, Rowan smiled, a small, tired smile, but real. Maybe home wasn't just a place, he murmured. Maybe it was waiting in someone else's kindness. Unseen from the porch, the lights of Hollow Creek glimmered in the valley below, and in those lights whispers had already begun, tales of the proud cowboy who come back rich but found something richer still. Humility. By the end of that week, the peace at the Cade Ranch had stirred something restless in Hollow Creek. Folks in town began to talk, as they always do when kindness looks too much like love. "Did you hear?" said the blacksmith's wife, polishing her husband's anvil. "That rich cowboy's living with the widow now. They say he's spending nights there," muttered another. "Nonsense," replied the saloon keeper, though he grinned. "A man don't fix a roof for free unless he's building himself a reason to stay." The talk spread faster than prairie fire. By Sunday morning, even Reverend Mallory had heard the whispers. He found Rowan outside the church, hitching his horse after service. "Son," the preacher said gently, "this town's tongues are sharp. You best be careful. That woman's good, but folks will try to twist what they don't understand." Rowan straightened, his jaw tight. "Let 'em talk. I know the truth, Reverend." Mallory nodded. "Just make sure she don't pay the price for your pride." That evening, Clara went into town alone to fetch medicine for Rowan's father. But the moment she stepped into the general store, the room went quiet. Women whispered behind shelves. Men avoided her eyes. She pretended not to hear. She'd lived through worse, through hunger, through burying a husband with her bare hands. But this was the kind of cruelty that left no bruises, only silence. As she left the store, a familiar voice stopped her. "Clara." Rowan stood there holding his hat. He'd seen everything from across the street. "They look at me like I did something wrong," she whispered. "All I ever did was care for folks who needed it." Rowan's eyes burned. "You don't deserve their gossip. You deserve peace." He looked at her, then at the town, the same streets that once cheered his name, now judging the woman who saved his parents. Something hardened inside him. The next morning, Hollow Creek woke to see Rowan Cade riding through town on his chestnut stallion, stopping right in front of the saloon. He stood in the stirrups and called out for all to hear. "Y'all got the story wrong. That woman you whisper about, she's the reason my folks are alive. She's worth more than every dollar I ever made. You got shame to spare, pointed at me, not her." The crowd froze. Then, one by one, the heads lowered. No one dared speak. From that day on, the whispers died out. But in the quiet that followed, something new began to grow. Respect and maybe something deeper. Autumn crept slowly over the valley. The leaves turned gold, the nights colder, and the sound of crickets faded from the porch. The Cade Ranch looked alive again. Fences mended, roofs strong, smoke rising from the chimney each morning. But beneath all that peace, something unseen was wearing Clara down. Rowan noticed first in her hands how they shook when she lifted the kettle, how her breath came shorter, climbing the hill behind the barn. "You're pushing yourself too hard," he told her one morning. "Let me handle things." She smiled, brushing him off. "I've worked through worse, Mr. Cade. You just focus on your parents." But that evening, as she bent to stoke the fire, her knees gave out. Rowan caught her just before she fell, her face pale as paper. He carried her to the cot by the hearth, calling for his mother. The old woman hurried over, worry carved deep in her eyes. "She's been running herself thin," Mrs. Cade said softly. "Barely eats, barely rests, always tending to us first." Rowan sat by Clara's side through the night. The lamplight flickered across her face, gentle, tired, peaceful, even in pain. He hadn't realized how much her presence had filled this home until now, when silence felt wrong without her humming in it. When dawn came, Clara woke to find him still there, hat in his lap, eyes red from sleeplessness. "You stayed?" she whispered. He nodded. "Didn't feel right leaving." She tried to smile. "You've got a good heart, Rowan." just keep it buried under all that dust and money. He almost laughed, but his throat tightened instead. Clara, you gave my parents their life back. Let me do the same for you. She turned her face toward the window where the sunrise painted the hills, orange and gold. I don't need saving, Rowan. Just promise me this. Don't ride away again. Not from them. Not from what's left of this place. He took her hand gently. You have my word. Outside, the morning wind swept through the fields like a whisper of change, and for the first time in years, Rowan Cade bowed his head and prayed, not for wealth, not for success, but for the life of one woman who had given him everything he never knew he'd lost. The wind began to change that afternoon, dry at first, then heavy with the scent of rain. Hollow Creek had a way of remembering its pain, and Rowan felt it in his bones before the clouds even rolled in. He was mending the barn fence when the sky went dark as bruised steel. Thunder grumbled in the distance, the same low growl that had haunted this valley since the flood that took Jasper Vance. Rowan's stomach twisted. It was as if the land itself was warning him that history was circling back. Inside the cabin, Clara lay weak beneath a wool blanket. Her fever had returned, sweat glistening on her forehead. Mrs. Cade tried to soothe her with damp claws, whispering prayers that broke between sobs. Rowan stormed in from the yard, rain already streaking down his coat. The creek's rising again, he said, voice shaking. If it floods, we'll be trapped here. Clara opened her eyes, faint but steady. Go, she whispered. Take your parents to the church on the hill. I'm not leaving you, he said sharply. You will, she replied. You'll do for them what I did. You'll save them. Lightning split the sky. The cabin rattled as the storm let loose. Rowan's father stood in the doorway, gripping his shoulder. Son, she's right. We can't lose you too. For a moment, Rowan couldn't breathe. Everything he'd fought for, every mile he'd ridden, it all came down to this one choice, duty or heart. Then, without another word, he lifted Clara into his arms. We all go, he said. No one stays behind. They fought through the rain, the world turning to mud and chaos. The creek was already spilling its banks, water roaring like a wild beast. The old horse wagon was waiting by the gate. Rowan set his parents inside, then turned to lift Clara, but her strength was gone. She clung to his coat, eyes wide and full of tears. Rowan, she gasped. Don't! He didn't let her finish. He carried her through the rising flood, his boots sinking deep, water climbing to his waist. Every step was agony, every breath burned, but he kept going, whispering her name like a prayer between thunderclaps. By the time they reached the church steps, the storm was blinding. Reverend Mallory and a handful of townsfolk rushed out to help. They took his parents inside first, then reached for Clara. Her hand slipped from his for just a moment, but in that moment Rowan felt the same terror that once took her husband. He shouted her name, but the wind swallowed it whole. And then silence. The rain began to ease. The worst had passed. But when Rowan looked down, Clara's eyes were closed, her pulse faint beneath his trembling fingers. He sank to his knees in the mud, the millionaire cowboy who had once thought himself unbreakable, now praying harder than he ever had before. By dawn, Hollow Creek lay drowned in silver mist. The rain had stopped, but the land still whispered with water, dripping from branches, trickling through flooded fields. The storm had passed, yet it left the valley quiet as a prayer. Inside the old church, candles flickered against damp wooden walls. Rowan sat beside Clara's cot, his head bowed, hat resting in his lap. His parents were safe in the next room, but his heart refused to leave the one who saved them all. Clara had not woken since the flood. Her hair clung to her forehead, her breathing shallow and fragile as wind through reeds. Reverend Mallory had done what he could, binding her wounds and saying the words only faith can hold. She's still with us, he told Rowan softly, but the good Lord's hand is heavy tonight. Rowan didn't answer. He only reached out and took her hand in his. It was cold, too cold. He rubbed it gently between his palms, whispering the things he should have said long ago. "I spent 10 years chasing the world, Clara," he said quietly. "Money, land, pride. None of it filled what was empty. You did that without asking a thing in return. You gave me back my family, my soul." For a long moment, nothing stirred. Then, just as his tears fell onto her hand, she breathed out a weak laugh, a sound soft as a sigh. "You always did talk too much, Mr. Cade." He froze, eyes wide. Clara's eyes fluttered open, pale but alive, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You call him through the water for me," she whispered. He smiled through tears. "Couldn't let the creek take another Vance." Her fingers brushed his. "You're a stubborn fool, and you're the reason I ain't one no more." Outside, the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, washing the valley in gold. From the church steps, Reverend Mallory watched in silence as the light touched the faces of two people who had weathered more than just a storm. The flood had taken fences, bridges, and barns, but it had given back something the land itself seemed to honor: redemption. The flood waters receded slowly, leaving behind a valley scarred but alive. Broken fences lay half buried in mud, trees leaned at odd angles, and the scent of wet earth filled the air. Yet to Rowan, everything looked beautiful, because Clara was breathing again. Days passed inside the church, where the townsfolk gathered to share what little they had. Clara regained her strength bit by bit, her spirit as stubborn as the wildflowers pushing through the soaked soil. Each morning, Rowan brought her water, tea, or just a smile that said more than words ever could. "You should rest," he'd tell her. "And miss you fussing over me? Not a chance," she'd reply, her voice raspy but teasing. When she could finally stand again, they stepped outside together. The valley stretched before them, battered, yes, but full of promise. Rowan looked across the land his family had owned for generations, and something inside him shifted. "I built my fortune far from here," he said quietly. "Bought more land than I could ride across. But all that gold never built nothing that mattered. I want to change that." Clara frowned softly. "What are you saying?" He turned to her, eyes clear as the morning sky. "I'm giving it back, every acre my father claimed, every field left empty. We'll rebuild Hollow Creek together. Not for profit, for people." Word spread fast. By the week's end, men from neighboring towns arrived, drawn by the promise of honest work. Rowan hired them all: widows, drifters, orphans, anyone with hands to help. They rebuilt homes, fences, and bridges, and for the first time, Hollow Creek wasn't divided by wealth or name. Every night, the church bell rang, not for prayer, but for supper. Tables were set outside beneath lanterns, and laughter filled the air once more. Clara often stood beside Rowan, her hand resting lightly on his arm, watching the town rise again from ruin. "You've done something good here," she told him one evening. He looked at her, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "We did, Clara," she smiled, that quiet, knowing smile that had changed his life. The wind rolled soft through the grass, carrying the scent of rain and wood smoke. And for the first time, Rowan Cade realized that wealth wasn't counted in gold or cattle. It was measured in the hearts that healed beside you. Years passed, and Hollow Creek changed like the season, from ruin to rebirth, from silence to song. Where flood water once raged, green pastures now stretched wide. Children laughed where fences once broke, and church bells rang not for mourning, but for weddings and harvest feasts. At the heart of it all stood the Cade Ranch, no longer a symbol of power but of hope. Rowan and Clara ran it together, not as landowners and caretaker, but as equals. The people called them the guardians of the valley, though they never claimed the title. On the porch every evening, Rowan sat with Clara beside him, watching the sunset spill across the fields. His parents had long since passed, resting beneath the cottonwoods Jasper Vance once planted, a place tended by loving hands and quiet prayers. One autumn day, as the sky burned orange, Clara turned to him with that familiar gentle smile. "You ever miss it?" she asked. "All the money, the cities, the deals?" Rowan chuckled low. "Not a day. I thought I was a rich man back then, but I didn't know what riches meant till I met you." She squeezed his hand, her touch still steady despite the years. And now, he looked toward the horizon where the sun melted into gold. "Now, I reckon I found everything a man could want: peace, purpose, and someone to share it with." That night the wind carried the scent of sage and rain, the same as the day he'd first written home. And when Clara laid her head against his shoulder, Rowan Cade felt the world finally still. The cowboy, who had once chased the horizon, now had nowhere left to go, because his journey had already found its end. When the townsfolk spoke of him years later, they told the story of the millionaire cowboy who came home to learn the worth of a good heart. And under the cottonwoods by the creek, where the grass swayed in the wind, two names rested side by side: Rowan Cade and Clara Vance, carved not in stone, but in the memory of every soul Hollow Creek ever raised. The legend was simple, yet eternal. He found a widow caring for his parents, and what he did next changed all their lives forever.